I wanted to kind of start way at the top, big picture. I'm not sure you've seen any of this, and I'm not sure you've seen it all put together. But this is Vicksburg's all three elementary schools put together with the top to bottom ranking from 2012 to 2013. You remember the Z-scores? Sort of, right? And so you see that there are three scores. The achievement level, which is based on the percent proficient. And remember, they take the state average, they calculate that, and then this is the standard deviation where you're above or below the state average. Remember, we want a positive number. Okay, then the middle number for each row is the improvement number, where they actually look at how a student performed at grade 3 and compare that performance to grade 4 to see if the student grew or not grew or stayed the same. You obviously want that to be a positive number as well, because they calculate the state average for growth, if you remember, and then they compare every student and you get a standard deviation as that as well. And then there's the gap number, which compares the average of the top 30% to the average of the bottom 30% in the distance in between, calculates a state average, and then a Z-score for each. These numbers then would have all tests, all grades that would have been tested in your building or in the other two buildings as well. And Indian Lake, for some reason, and Pat probably knows the answer, I don't, doesn't have enough fourth graders. Is that okay? So it doesn't have enough fourth graders 2 years running, so they don't have any writing data I mean, they have some for the kids who took the test, but you have to have at least 30 in order for that to be ranked. So that is not included in their top to bottom ranking. So for Indian Lake, their top to bottom ranking is based on 4 scores, math, reading, science, and social studies, each of them being 25%, and yours and Toby's being 20%, because you have enough in all 5 content areas for them to be counted. Okay? Can you see that? Okay, I know the numbers are a little small. And so the first column obviously is 2012. It shows your trajectory from 12 to 13. If the numbers were positive over a 1, I highlighted them green just so that we could see that and they would stand out. If it was a negative 1 or below, I highlighted it in orange. Danger, Will Robinson. And then you can see the movement. So interesting, I thought, that Toby, not that we want to pick on Toby, but went from being a reward school in 2012 with a rank of 92 all the way down to 70. And we see that in the state a lot, that there's a lot of fluctuation as high as 50 or 60 points on the top to bottom ranking, which is kind of interesting. Because last year was the first year, we had no idea what kind of movement people would see from year to year. You were relatively constant in a positive trajectory, and Indian Lake was as well. Whoops, and I turned that off. What do you notice? What do you notice about this? What do you see that you like? What do you see that you don't like?
It's like the gap, correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
Like the gap closed a bit in science from 2012 to 2013.
Yeah, at Sunset Lake. Yeah, pretty drastically, you cut it in half. From a almost negative 1.5 to negative 0.78. That's huge. Yes, absolutely, that's huge. Because these numbers, 1, 2, and 3, in writing specifically, in science and in math, would have been the culprits for having been identified as a focus school last year. And certainly our math score and our writing scores, I mean, you're kind of almost on the edge of not being identified as a focus school. So you see it moving in a positive way. What else do you see? Either about you or about your colleagues. Yes, ma'am.
I read it as our math scores, our gap increase between 12 and 13.
Yep. Yes, your gap in math did increase.
Everything else decreased at least a little bit.
At least a little bit. This one went up just a teeny bit. Yep, just a little bit. From negative 1.2 to negative 1.3. You're right. You guys doing reading and you guys doing math, I'd like you to kind of by grade level, because now we're going to dig. We looked at the big numbers. Now we're going to dig more specifically into each grade level and then eventually into the bottom 30%. So we're kind of heading down that slope now. If you would, so how many students would you predict percentage of third graders would be at blue, green, yellow, and red in reading? How many third graders, fourth, fifth, and sixth would be blue, green, yellow, and red in math? And then when you're done with that, we'll kind of look at math together. So go ahead and make the prediction. Go ahead and fill out the numbers first individually, and then we're getting ready to have a group conversation here in phase one for those people who are watching. And again, if you remember from when we did this last year, your numbers, it doesn't really matter how close you are or how accurate. We're simply trying to get an image, a trend in your mind of what it is that you expect to see when we look at that data more specifically in just a minute. The only rule here is that each column has to equal 100. Everybody get numbers? If you would, then either flip that over, or if you're using a small piece of paper, remember I'm going to ask you to put those predictions into words. Say something about those numbers. When you look at those numbers now, what are you really saying about reading or math proficiency? Write at least one. Remember, we call this a prediction. This is what we're predicting the numbers will be, or why we're predicting what we see. For example, I predict that every year the percent proficient will increase. And if you remember from last year, once you get that prediction, I want you to think about why you're predicting that, which we call an assumption. And if you think that there are more than one prediction or assumption that you think is important to note, because remember, we're going to talk about these and we're going to chart these and put them on the wall. So if there's another one, as you're looking at those numbers, you go, yeah, there's one, but here's another one that's equally significant, then go ahead and write that one as well. You're not limited to one. You can look at that data and see if your prediction, if you think there's something else that's really important that you want noted. So everybody should have some numbers. We've kind of looked at those and determined meaning, so we have at least one prediction and an assumption, maybe two, if you think that something's really important. So then, if you remember this drill because you facilitate it all the time, I'm going to ask you to do this in a round robin style, which means everybody gives a turn, and you're going to record the predictions and assumption as many. If you have three, we're going to record all three. If you have one, we'll record the one. Remember, the purpose here is for us to understand each other's predictions and assumptions, not to debate them. We don't have to agree or disagree. We'll do this for reading and writing separately. We'll listen to them, we'll hear them, then we'll look at writing real quickly and then see if there's anything we need to add to the writing when we talk about that. Okay, and then we'll be ready to move to phase two. All right, so I give you about 5 minutes or so I gave you a huge assortment of markers to choose your favorite colors. And so we'll record predictions and assumptions for reading and math. Who wants to write? Laura's writing. All right, so Laura, you want to talk about your groups?
So, first prediction, that reading proficiency slowly decreases as the grade levels increase from 3rd to 6th grade. And our assumption about that is that as grade levels increase, that direct reading instruction decreases. So more time is spent in the lower grades on reading instruction, phonics, fluency, all of that instruction. Where in upper elementary, it's more comprehension and bigger ideas, not necessarily the craft of decoding.
Okay.
Our second prediction, the number of students who are not proficient increases from 3rd through 6th grade. So this is really the inverse of the first one. And our assumption about that is that more focus and time and instruction is spent in other subject areas.
Okay, so the first one says that reading proficiency slowly decreases. And then the downside of that, of course, is then that if proficiency decreases, non-proficiency increases. Yes, absolutely. Okay.
The third, proficiency levels will stay about the same.
Okay.
Assumption, more focus and time spent on other subjects, writing and science.
Okay.
So that prediction was that...
it's going to just be flat.
Yeah.
Flat. All right.
Okay. And then finally, after we got all of those and did some more thinking about it, we came up with a prediction that reading is not being taught in other content areas, and maybe that's why scores are going down.
Okay.
So, to expand that a little bit, we teach science and social studies in lower elementary, but our prediction is right now we're all thinking that reading is reading, and science and social studies are science and social studies. And maybe we're doing it that way. Our assumption could be that we have a lack of resources that support reading instruction in those content areas.
Right. But think about the implication if that prediction is right, and we talked about it over here, so for the benefit of you guys, if that prediction is right, that even if at the elementary level, we are less inclined to teach reading in the other disciplines, what does that tell us about what might be occurring at the middle school and the high school? I mean, if in grade 5, we're already focusing more on, on the content, and we're not as mindful about teaching some of those skills, certainly when somebody who's secondary trained, not necessarily a reading person who's teaching science or social studies or what doesn't matter what subjects outside of ELA, there's an implication there for if that continues to happen. Not saying that it does, we're just saying that it's an interesting implication. Sure, if you want to, sure. Yeah. I was looking right at you, so.
I would say I always look at science as a vehicle to teaching a lot of different things. So it is easy to teach reading via science. But science experts would say that you need to be doing science, like literally immersed in inquiry to understand and put together. But I think that there has to be a balance of that.
Right.
So I think that although the middle school isn't maybe doing the greatest job at it, I know that in my classroom I'm attempting to, but I'm not a reading expert either.
Right.
But I would also say that there needs to be communication about what reading strategies would be the most impactful.
Absolutely.
And having that dialogue down 12K.
Oh.
And if we're all using the same strategies, like somebody said these would be the best reading strategies in science, then I could do those. Right now I just go, which of the 50,000 should I do?
Let me pick one.
Yes, and so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's go back to our assumption too, that the resources, physical resources or training resources, could contribute to that.
I was working with a middle school and a high school. It's a smaller district, so they really kind of function, even though they're two buildings, as a 612. And courageously, they really wanted to focus across those two buildings on reading and writing. And were courageous enough to say, let's put that into the teacher growth model for teacher evaluation, which I thought was huge. But they didn't know how to do it. And so that, then they were cool with, okay, we think this is really important. Now we're stuck, because now I'm a 6th grade teacher and I'm not reading trained, and I don't know how to, I don't know where to start. And so that was it. It kind of piggybacks on your comment. Some people get it and intuitively, other people struggle. You can Google and get 10,000 different strategies. What do you choose? Yeah, those are very interesting ideas if they continue to occur, throughout, absolutely. What about the math folks? What did you talk about? Anyone want to share? Jenny, thank you very much.
Basically, all of us agreed that proficiency would decrease over time.
Okay.
And our different assumptions were that the content becomes more difficult, moving from whole number to fractions.
Sure does.
Also, that the student gaps in learning are not identified and remediated soon enough. And so those gaps, as the years progress, become wider.
Okay.
We also said that there was not enough time to implement comprehension interventions for those kiddos. And there were many concerns in our group over resistance to interventions coming from students and parents.
Sure.
I don't know how to help my child in math. I wasn't good at math, so we don't do math games at home. And we all grew up playing math games and Yahtzee, and it's just not happening now.
Right.
So there's some math anxiety and resistance, I think.
I think math and science get hit the most with anxiety, don't they? Both of them, there's that assumption you have to have a unique skill to be able to do either one of them. And certainly we could even tie in, if it's appropriate, our own level of comfort in those disciplines, which Pat talked about at the very beginning, and everybody nodded their head. If I feel more comfortable teaching reading, and then as the math increases in difficulty, I might be one of those people that would shy away from that as well, right? Just because we're in the classroom doesn't mean we're immune to shying away from those things that are difficult.
And math is huge. It's, you have your math facts that you have to teach. There's problem solving, there's measurement and geometry, there's all the different, parts of it. And so some people may be comfortable teaching just one small part, but not the rest. So
Right.
just inconsistent delivery.
Inconsistent delivery. Okay. Anything that's not on the list, because you all teach both reading and math, all of you in the room, is there anything that needs to be added that is kind of like on your mind, you'd really like to say it so that somebody could write it down so that it won't be bugging you for the next hour and a half? No? When we get to writing, they only do it in grade 4, okay, in the elementary level. So let's, as a group, let's make up, what do you think, what are predictions for the numbers first? How many what percentage from writing a year ago were blue, green, yellow, and red? Probably or you know really closely, but so you just play, but what do we think they are? What are you predicting? Somebody throw a number out there. What percentage do you think was blue? 5. All right. What about green?
30.
I heard 25. I heard 30. 45. Pick a number, somebody. Way low. We'll go with the writing share. We'll say 45. Okay, so what we're saying is that, half of our students passed the writing test. Okay. What about yellow? Partially proficient, but not quite there yet. 35%. And if my math is correct, that leaves us with 15% in Filene's basement down there in the red zone. Of course, Filene's basement's closed, so we got to get them out of the bottom. All right, so we had a little bit of disparity in terms of numbers. So regardless of these numbers, what were you thinking in your head in terms of writing performance and why? So everybody think of something. Think of what you're predicting for writing and why, and then we'll hear those. You were predicting much lower. Do you want to start? All right. Someone else who has either an opposing view or a different take entirely?
I would think
Mary?
it's your first official standardized test.
In writing.
Yeah, in writing, that if you're not aligned, that you're gonna have a lower proficiency.
So you agree then that you're going to see weak? Do you think it'll be lower than this? Jenny's saying yes. What about Mary? Yes? Okay, so you're going to say lower than 50% proficient. And why are you saying that again, Mary?
Well, I think if you haven't been consistent with the instruction of the program, and it's your first standardized test. I always feel like when you have that first test for any kid on anything, there's that level, there's that whole nother test game you gotta play with them.
Yep.
In terms of them, I think anytime you give a kid a test, a standardized test for the first time, you have to factor the testing, anxiety, stress, what are the expectations of me, it's long, that into it, that plays a whole another game in their mental mindset.
Sure.
Preparation.
Sure. So this is the first time they have to produce writing.
Yes.
Okay. On a standardized test that they're going to turn in. Okay, absolutely. Anybody else want to add something different? Laura.
So I guess my prediction would also be weak performance in writing.
All right.
Because the writing that we're doing in the classroom is different from the writing on the test, and that we're editing and revising in the classroom and producing multiple drafts and looking at it with peers and using resource books and on and on. So, and the test set's not going to go.
Right. They have to go from 0 to 100 quickly, right? Absolutely. A different prediction for anybody? Prediction or assumption?
Assumption is, I'd like to say, I was looking at the anchor papers in the Common Core State Standards notebook,
Uh-huh.
and when I saw what fifth graders were supposed to write, it looks, more mature than some of the things I've seen freshmen and sophomores write. I don't think we realize the level of expectations that are in the Common Core State Standards.
So are you predicting weak performance again? Okay. All right. So I've seen some examples and our kids don't write like that. Okay, that's a good. Laura?
I agree with Pat.
Okay. Weak performance?
Well, I think, I think 45% is weak performance.
Okay.
But
So even-
I'm gonna stand by my number.
All right, these numbers hold, but they're not great, even if those are true.
Right,
Okay.
right. Stellar. So,
Okay.
and I agree with what Laura said as well, that classroom writing and unit test writing are two very different.
Okay.
And the stamina and endurance that students need to have in
Stamina
writing,
endurance, yep.
over prolonged periods of time, they're kind of like once it's written, it's done.
Yeah.
And so we just need to work on the writing process more.
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Yep.
share those anchor papers with students.
Yep.
To see what it really needs to look like.
I was helping my sophomore in honors English, and he has no idea how to edit a paper. You know, he arrived at the end and he was like, "Help me with a conclusion. I'm just not sure what to do." I mean, he had no idea. He doesn't go to Vicksburg, by the way. He had no idea what to do. And furthermore, when we said, "Well, how can we do that? Let's edit it first. Let's do some revision and editing before we get there, because an ending will just kind of like whoa, it'll just come out of there, And yeah, he had no concept of how to do that. Those are hard skills. Those are hard skills. Anyone else? Anyone? Michelle?
I don't think enough time is spent on how to prepare for a grading test. I think that's an assumption. Weak performance, but yes,
Okay.
also, not a lot of time has been focused on how to prepare for a grading test.
And that goes beyond fourth grade. I mean, that should be third grade, that should start second grade.
Right. Tomorrow we're going to take a writing test, right? Okay. So somehow that's got to be built into the program so that when they get to fourth grade, right, that they're able to do that. Because the fourth grade writing test currently in the system that we have measures K3 writing program, right? So in the course of those 4 years, we're supposed to have them ready to do that they, kind of perform at the beginning of fourth grade. Oh, we can add as many assumptions as you want. Yes, ma'am.
Lack of teacher, comfort and
Again, this one?
absolutely
All right.
consistent delivery. It's the first thing I'll skip in a day if something has to go. Oh shoot, we can't do grading today.
Oh, spoken from a true math person! Let's do numbers! That's okay. I mean, right? I think that's the hard part about being, and I was never an elementary teacher, so I'm making the assumption that must be very difficult because I know what I'm good at, I know what I'm comfortable with, and that's what I spent my day teaching. No one ever asked me to start out the education of youngsters in an area that was outside of my comfort zone. And so even though my training was a little bit different, and not that drastically different, and you guys are being asked at the elementary to teach that which we love, that which we're really comfortable in, and then ultimately areas where we're not as comfortable.
Because when you look at your children's final product, you're just going like this.
What do I do?
What did I do wrong? And
Yep.
so, if you're teaching something and then you look at the end result and you don't feel very good about yourself, yeah.
It's hard. It's hard. It's hard. Absolutely. Anything else that we need to add as we kind of wrap up phase one? You've done a brilliant job, I must say.